I just read an article in the Washington Post about literacy and the process of learning to read. And the author's point of view suggests that, research is not based necessarily on how children learn, but instead how children learn in schools. And she suggests that there's a difference. And if you look at societies, more indigenous type societies, there's a different way that children go about learning than in Western societies where children are put in school, and that's kind of viewed as the right path or the proper path, to learn to read and to become educated. In other societies, there's a more informal learning process of learning from elders or trial and error, or being in mixed societies with different genders, different ages, and learning from playing with older children, as opposed to just, playing with children of your own age, different things. And that one of the things that the author says is, schools are a relatively new phenomena, and, people learned before there were schools. And so, again, of course, I, take it and compare it to basketball. And so just as much of the research from education is based on what happens within the education system and doesn't account for potential learning that can happen outside of the education system or outside of a classroom. Typical research within sports, or the way that most people will view sports, is based on what happens within a structured environment, and we tend to ignore what happens outside of that structured environment. And so just as she suggests that we're missing real opportunities for learning because we only view things through the lens of schools, I would suggest that we're missing real opportunities for learning because we view things only through the lens of teams. And so to suggest that you can't learn to shoot a basketball without having a coach, or without being on a team, or without receiving proper instruction, I don't think is accurate. And the author spoke about how she was an adept reader when she was young, even though she wasn't very good at phonics. So essentially she could do the whole, but she wasn't good at the part. And a lot of times that's what happens with children in sports, is you have some children who spend all their time in practices, getting good fundamental instruction with coaches, and they're very good at the parts. But then you have other ones who develop outside of a organized league, and they may not be as good at the parts, but they're very good at the whole. They're very good at playing games. And ultimately that's what we're trying to get children be able to do within sports, is ultimately it's the game. We're not trying to perfect practice. We're trying to improve performance in games. And so even in the class that I taught this summer, I had a student who suggested that. She said, if you put her in any kind of drill in practice, she mastered it very quickly. She was very, very good in any, I think she was a soccer player, any type of, dribbling through cones or passing back and forth. She was very good. But she said she was a terrible soccer player. She couldn't transfer that skill that she was able to exhibit in a sterile practice environment into a game environment. She was good at the part, but she was never able to put all of those parts together into a whole. And so some children need that kind of development. They need the part practice. They need to spend hours simply working on shooting technique and dribbling technique and all these things. And they're able to put those parts together and become an effective player. But a lot of children are better off if they learn organically through playing and through trial and error, and they learn through the whole. And then as they develop and learn and ask questions and play with older players and play with younger players and are put in different situations, if they need some more practice, they can see that, okay, well, I'm not quite a good enough shooter, I need to spend more time in shooting, or my shot looks really different than these other players who are much better shooters than me. I'm going to try and change my shot to be a little bit more like somebody else. And I know that's how I learned a lot. I played on teams. I had coaches who stressed the part. But I credit a lot of my learning to the pickup games that I played and different situations that I was in, and especially when I played with older players, and especially older players who, after I finished a game, would then give me some advice or give me something to work on or tell me something or show me how. I remember when I was in like 7th or 8th grade, I was playing against high school varsity players. And one of the guys, Chris Borsich, he kind of showed me what a floater would be so I could get a shot off. And he was a good shooter, and he helped me a little bit get my shot a little bit quicker. And so these types of learning experiences for many children would be advantageous and would help them improve quicker than going through that part process and eventually trying to put all those parts together, into a whole and to actually play the game. So it doesn't mean necessarily that, practicing individually is wrong. But I think the idea that has kind of come about now that, a child can't learn to play basketball without having a coach or without having, a structured practice, I think that underestimates children's power of learning and what children can do when given the opportunity to learn on their own, to learn with friends, to learn in a social setting, and especially to learn with children who are younger and older, so there's variation in age and ability and experience, and so they can help learn from each other, teach each other, figure things out on their own. That becomes a pivotal learning opportunity for children that's in a lot of ways has been taken away from children in today's society because we have so many organized activities. A lot of schools don't have recess anymore, a lot less pickup games at the park, things like that. There are fewer and fewer and fewer of these opportunities for children to learn in these social settings amongst friends and peers and older children. And instead, we're forced into these more sterile, practice-structured environments where everything is adult-centered, and we've lost some of that natural learning process. And so if we're going to continue to exist in this society where we've taken away these unstructured opportunities, we need to give players in our structured settings, we need to give them some freedom so that some of that social learning, some of that trial and error, some of that natural learning can take place within a structured setting. So again, ideally, we can recreate these unstructured experiences for children so they can learn and develop naturally. But if we can't recreate those experiences, we need to bring some of those aspects of learning into and inform our structured settings with some of that type of learning and the trial and error and the younger and older ages, and peer help and things of this nature into our structured practice settings.